What's the story, everyone? Welcome back to GA Fan TV. I hope the form is good. I hope the form is well. It's time for another championship preview. It's time to predict this weekend's games happening in the All-Ireland Senior Football Championship. And I suppose four big games to discuss, four big games to break down. And it's mad to think that after this weekend, we will know for certain who will be playing in the various provincial finals. We already know Connacht and Munster, of course, but this weekend it's the Ulster Senior Football semi-finals and the Leinster Senior Football semi-finals. We've got Derry versus Monaghan, which poses to be a bit of a very hard game to predict, if I'm being being totally honest, and very excited for that game. Probably on paper the game of the week, the game of the weekend, you would have to say, in Gaelic football. Armagh versus Down as well, I think, is another very interesting game because it's a very sticky game for Armagh. Down are coming under the radar, I think, in my opinion. Dublin versus Kildare will most likely be a formality in Leinster, but Louth versus Offaly, that's an extremely interesting game. Offaly haven't played in a Leinster final since 2006, and Louth haven't played in a Leinster final since 2010. So there's a lot on the line for various different counties this weekend, and undoubtedly we're going to see some stories, some trills and spills, and I'm very excited for it. If you are new to the channel, if you could hit the like button and subscribe, helps the channel out, getting closer to 4,000 subscribers, and if we could hit that very soon, it would be much appreciated. So if you haven't subscribed already, just hit the subscribe button. Very much helps me out. I suppose here we go then, time to break down this weekend's games, and it is just myself today for today's preview. Only 4 matches, so I think when there isn't too many games, I like to sort of just do these ones myself. Derry versus Monaghan, we'll start with that game in Armagh. Wow, this is as I was thinking there, I'll be honest, it's such a hard one to call, and before I've even hit the record button on my camera here, I'm not entirely sure which way I'm gonna go. I feel like my head says Derry, but I feel like my heart leans towards Monaghan, because I think Monaghan have just proven time and time again that they keep coming back from adversity, and every time we keep writing them off, they find a way to prove you wrong. And I think Monaghan pose a very sticky team for Derry, as a matter of fact. And I think what makes this game so interesting is that it's two sides that will give absolutely everything for the full 70 minutes and possibly even more. Derry, as we've seen with Rory Gallagher, a hugely passionate manager, and a team that very much reflects the way that their manager is. They keep going for the full 70 minutes, full throttle. There's no letting off. We've seen Rory Gallagher before saying, he doesn't believe in breaks. He doesn't believe in players being rested or anything of that nature. And they will go for Monaghan's throat right from the get-go. And that's what makes it very fascinating. And Monaghan, on the other hand side, although they started quite slow against Tyrone in that Ulster quarter-final, when they got going in the second half, you saw the energy that they brought and some of their attacking play and some of their players as well. They will cause a lot of problems for Derry, in my opinion, as well. And it's a tricky one for Derry, because Derry, if they were going in against Tyrone, they would have been the underdogs, and there would have been a scenario where Derry were underdogs, Tyrone are favourites. It would suit Derry down to the ground. But in this game, Monaghan are going in as the underdogs. Not by much, but I think they are going in as the underdogs. And that probably suits Monaghan down to the ground. And in some ways, it probably ramps up the pressure on Derry ever so slightly. And with Derry, there certainly are still some unknowns. We know that the quality of some of their players. Shane McGuigan scored 2-5 against Fermanagh. He was absolutely outstanding. Paul Cassidy had a very good game as well. The likes of Lakeland Murray, who've started to make the breakthrough into this Derry side, and some of the other younger players as well. But with Derry, there are some unknowns, because through Division 2, let's be honest, the quality in Division 2 was other than Dublin and Derry, it was actually quite poor, if we're actually being perfectly honest. Louth did very well, but I think aside from that, the quality in Division 2 was quite poor. So it's hard to really know what level Derry are at. They brushed Fermanagh aside, and it's interesting with Derry, because you do have some people who are saying, they're not in contention for Sam Maguire. You have some people who are saying that they're possibly one of the best sides in the country. I think in the Ulster Championship, in these provincial grounds, this is their playground. This is what they are made for. When they get to Croke Park, I think there is an element of them that could struggle, and there's a lot of unknowns to see how they would deal in an All-Ireland quarter-final in Croke Park, maybe in a much more expansive pitch, coming up against one of the top teams in the country. But in these provincial stadiums, this is their playground, and this is how they love to play. I think they will sit in deep. I think what Rory Beggan brings to you with Monaghan is that, if Derry try and press Monaghan high up the pitch, Beggan will just kick over. He'll just kick over that midfield, he'll kick over that full forward line, and Monaghan will get tons of chances on the counter-attack. And in many ways, like, that's what we've seen them do against Tyrone, and that's obviously how the Ryan O'Toole goal came about as well. And the thing about Monaghan is they have so many ways that they could hurt Derry. Like last year when they played Derry, I felt like Monaghan was in a weird place at times under Banty McEnany. I felt like they always would pull it out of the bag on the final day of the league, but in the championship they were usually quite flat. Like obviously they got to an Ulster final in 2021, and they were probably a little bit unlucky not to win that game. But there just seems to be something different about Monaghan this year under Vinnie Corey. They're far more consistent than what they usually were. Like under Banty and even under Malachy O'Rourke towards the end of his era in charge of Monaghan, they would produce a brilliant and top-class performance every now and again, but then they'd follow that up with something very flat, and that seems to be gone with Monaghan. There seems to be a real sort of consistency about their performances, which I think poses a big threat for Derry. Conor McManus, as we said, looks back to his best. He was absolutely sensational in that win versus Tyrone, scoring 9 points. Ryan O'Toole's been a fantastic addition in at wing-back. He scored 1-1, and most notably that decisive winning goal. Jack McCarron and Conor McCarthy, two top-class forwards who on their day have the potential to cause a lot of problems. And it is funny, I think Derry probably have the better structure and organisation of how they play. Probably have a slightly better defence as well. But I think Monaghan have the better forwards overall. You could argue Shane McGuigan is the best forward. Right now, maybe McManus has slowed down a little bit in the last couple of seasons. But I think Monaghan have more ways to hurt Derry in attack than Derry have ways to hurt Monaghan, and I think that's what makes this very fascinating. You wonder as well, with the fact that Derry, obviously Conor Glass came off, looking like he was nursing an injury against Dublin, came off, same against Fermanagh as well. Obviously Chrissy McCaig came back in against Fermanagh, but you do wonder, with Derry, because they've been going so strong, and because there wasn't much of a break from Waddy Graham's Glen obviously getting to a All-Ireland final, you wonder, could there be an element of injuries? Could Derry, could they tire? Could the legs go? Because it's been full throttle for the whole year long, and you do wonder at some point, will those legs go? And that's why there is that part of me that feels that Derry, they will get caught at some point. It mightn't be in the Ulster Championship, but I think in, if you go further down the line in the group stages, I think there will be an element of Derry getting caught, because they do have a bit of a thin squad when you look at it. They don't have a huge amount of options and players who can come off the bench and change the game. Something we've seen against Dublin, for example, and that's maybe something that worries me ever so slightly about Derry. And it will be interesting to see who picks up Conor McManus as well. I think Chrissy McCaig was the man who picked him up last year and done a phenomenal job. But I think the thing about Monaghan is you can take Conor McManus out of the game, and I don't think it's what it was like a couple of years ago, where if you kept McManus quiet, you don't have the job in stopping Monaghan. I think now, with the likes of Jack McCarron, Micheál Bannigan, Conor McCarthy as well, Stephen O'Hanlon, who actually looked very impressive the last day as well, Monaghan have a lot of ways to hurt Derry, and that's why they can put a lot of emphasis on stopping Conor McManus. But at the same time, he only scored 1 point from play against Tyrone, and he was still had a huge impact on the game in terms of frees and obviously setting up scores as well. So it's an interesting one for Derry in terms of their approach to stopping this Monaghan attack, which looked quite lethal against Tyrone at times. Ultimately then, in terms of my prediction, as I said, it's a very, very hard one to call. I think for the opening 15-20 minutes, this might be a bit cagey. We might see Derry sit in. I think it's vital for Monaghan to start this game fast. I think if they start the game the same way they started against Tyrone, I don't think they'll come back in the same way. I think Derry will be much more better at keeping the lead, slowing the game down. Tyrone at times just fell apart defensively in the second half. We won't see that happen with Derry, so I think it's vital for Monaghan to start fast. I think if they start quickly, I think I give them a serious chance. What we will see for Derry though is for the full 70 minutes, we know how they're going to play. They're going to try and hit Monaghan on the counter attack. They're going to run the ball through the lines. They'll try and kick it into Shane McGuigan to get the best out of him. And will Monaghan have an answer for that for a full 70 minutes? It's going to be very tricky, to be honest. Ultimately, though, I'm just going to back Derry by the smallest of margins. I know I've backed against Monaghan pretty much for the entire season, and look, they'll probably go out and beat Derry and prove it wrong. To be honest with you, if I was a Monaghan fan and you've been watching this channel, you'll probably be thinking it's actually a good thing I'm backing against Monaghan, because every time I do, they go out and win, and every time I back for them, they go out and lose. So, do you know what I mean? It's probably a good thing, to be fair. I just think Derry are just that bit more further ahead right now. Like, it is still Vinnie Corey's first season. I still think Monaghan will be a serious threat going into that group stage. They're definitely a team that you don't want to play, because you know, most likely there'll be a team that has to play them in Clonus as well, which will be very tough in fairness. So I'm going to go with Derry by the smallest of margins. I think 1 or 2 points extra time could possibly be on the cards here, but I'm going to go with Derry to get the victory. Moving on to Down versus Armagh, and what a story it would be for Conor Laverty if he can lead Down to an Ulster final in his first season in charge. They haven't played in an Ulster final since 2017, and what a story it would be if he managed to get down to an Ulster final, considering where the county were this time last year, which was in absolute ruins, if we're being perfectly honest. And there's something building in Down. There's a togetherness building. Conor Laverty has got the Kilcoo lads on side. We've seen Ryan Johnston, Micheál Rooney, Noel Kane, Eugene Brannigan, Anthony Morgan as well, all line out for Down in that win versus Donegal. And there is a bit of an unknown about Down, because obviously we've seen Kilcoo as a phenomenal side in Down, and we've seen them go on and, you know, win the All-Ireland, and of course, you know, come very close to doing the same last year as well. They're a serious team, and I think with them now on this Down side, like, there's a serious chance that they actually go and beat Armagh. And I do look at it and think, like, Armagh haven't been perfect this year. There has been vulnerabilities about them. Obviously, Rian O'Neill came off the bench against Cavan, and you'd imagine he'd start this game. There'll be a huge amount of pressure on Armagh, because Armagh haven't reached an Ulster final since 2008. And obviously there's that statistic that's gone around for so long now. The fact that every county has reached an Ulster final in Ulster since Armagh have. There will be pressure here. It's a big game. It's a massive game for Armagh. You feel like for Kieran McGeeney, it's make or break in some ways, because if they lose this, losing to Down, considering the work that Armagh have done in the last couple of seasons, with it the fact that it's Down's first season under Conor Laverty, it would be a massive setback, In fairness to Armagh, I think Conor Turbett stepping up the last day was hugely impressive. Obviously scored 7 points, and we know some of the big players that they have, in the likes of Rory Grugan, Stephen Campbell, who's looked very good at times this year as well. And as I said, you would expect Rian O'Neill to start in this match as well. So look, Armagh Down, bit of a rivalry there as well, I suppose you could say, and you know, it's gonna be a fierce game in Clonus. You know, both sides are gonna bring the noise, bring the supporters. Very, very excited to watch this. As I said, like, I haven't seen enough of Down this year, which has been disappointing, because they've obviously been in Division 3. And when you look at it as well, like, Liam Kerr and even Pat Havern have looked very good for Down at times this season as well. So I give Down a serious chance, but I just think with what's on the line for Armagh, with the fact that it's such a big game in the Ulster Championship, like, you know, they have to be up for this. And in fairness, against Cavan, you know, they went from it right from the get-go. There was no messing around. I know Cavan were very flat in that match, but Armagh went for it, and they were on the front foot, on the attack, and they were brilliant from the get-go. And I fancy Armagh by 2 or 3 points, but there is that strong part of me that looks at it and think, I'll give Down a serious chance. And look, Down, if they lose this game, it'd be disappointment for them, but it won't be the end of the world. It's the first year for Conor Laverty, and mark my words, they'll go into the Tailteann Cup as favourites. Moving on to the Leinster Championship then, and we'll start with Louth versus Offaly, because you'd imagine this will be the most competitive of the two games. And look, it's a very fascinating and interesting game. I think with the fact that Louth haven't reached a Leinster final since 2010, and Offaly haven't reached a Leinster final since 2006. So look, there's a lot on the line here for both of these two. Offaly, obviously, you know, with that sensational win versus Meath, and Louth, obviously, with that sensational comeback versus Westmeath. So, yeah, you're looking at it from an Offaly point of view. Like, you know, funnily enough, like, I know people would look at Offaly's win versus Meath as a shock, and, you know, I think Meath football has seriously regressed, but I think this will be a tougher challenge for Louth against Offaly than Meath. Like, Louth, I would have looked at it and thought, you know, be very confident that they would have beat Meath, because I didn't expect Offaly to produce the type of performance they did against Meath to go and get the victory, and I didn't expect Offaly to look as good as they did. So I think this will be more of a stickier test from a Louth point of view, in my opinion. I think a huge plus for Louth is obviously having Samuel Roy coming back into the side. He scored 1-4 the last day, very impressive stuff from him. Conor Grimes and Conor Early were very impressive as well, with 2 points apiece. But from an Offaly perspective, look, they are building something, and obviously with the underage success that's been there in the last couple of seasons, this would be a massive step for Offaly football to get to a Leinster final for some of those younger players. I know, look, I think we'll all agree that Dublin would beat Offaly fairly convincingly, but what an opportunity it would be for those Offaly footballers, the likes of Cian Farrell, the likes of Jack Bryant, Cormac Egan, these lads to get an opportunity to play in Croke Park against the Dubs in a Leinster final. It would be huge. But in fairness to Offaly, you have to give the older guard a bit of credit, like Rory McNamee and Dylan Hyland were very impressive the last day. Anton Sullivan and Bernard Allen had two very impressive performances as well. Rory Egan scored 1-1 as well. So Offaly are coming in good, but I think, as I've said before, Mickey Hart and Louth, they're building something there. The fact they turned it around and came back in the way they did versus Westmeath, there's a serious amount of fight in Louth. There's a serious amount of spirit. You won't beat them easily this year. And even in that Leinster final, which we presume will be against Dublin if Louth win, I would still expect Dublin to win, but that Louth are going to battle, they're going to fight, they're going to show a tremendous amount of work rate than probably what we've seen against Meath and Kildare against Dubs in previous seasons. So I'm going to go with Louth to edge it by 1 or 2 points. Obviously with it being in Croke Park as well, it'd be interesting to see how that goes. Could that suit Offaly maybe, possibly? Would it been, they'll probably want to play more expansive football, but I'll go with Louth. And Dublin versus Kildare, which I think probably will be a foregone conclusion from a Dublin perspective. Kildare fans will say, look, when we played Dublin and Croke Park earlier in the year in the first game of the league, Kildare were actually very unlucky not to have won that game, and it was probably one of Kildare's better performances in the entirety of the National Football League in Division 2 this year. But look, that wasn't the same Dublin, let's be honest. Dublin were playing very much within themselves in that game. And when you look at how Dublin went for Laois's throw in the Leinster Championship quarter-finals, if Dublin do the same again to Kildare, there could be a lot of bloody noses in the opening 10-15 minutes, and it could be very tough for Kildare, if I'm being honest. The worrying part about Kildare is, yes, they obviously got a big win against Clare earlier in the year. They beat Limerick, they obviously beat Meath, and following on from that win versus Wicklow last weekend as well. The worrying part for Kildare is that when the going has got tough, when they've conceded an early goal and a couple of early points, their heads have gone. Against Cork, they just, that game was over after about 20 minutes. It was the same versus Derry. You think back to the Leinster final last year versus Dublin. Dublin just absolutely blew them away in the opening 15-20 minutes, and that would be a worry for Kildare. If Dublin come out flying out of traps, which I expect that they will, because that's how we did it against Kildare last year. That's what we did against Laois. And I think there's Dublin, in terms of their squad now, probably do have, you'd have to say, probably the best squad in the country. When you're looking at the likes of Stephen Cluxton, Jack McCaffrey, Paul Mannion, these lads all on the bench, Cormac Costello on the bench, Dublin have competition now for places, so we have to start strong, and the players on the pitch know they have to start strong, otherwise they could be dropped for that potential Leinster final. So that's the worrying point from a Kildare perspective. Defensively, they have looked very bad at times this year, and you could see Dublin just opening them up in the opening 15-20 minutes, build up a 7 or 8 to 9 point lead, and from then it will just be curtains and there'll be no way back from Kildare. I think Kildare will have to take inspiration at the same time from how they did play in Croke Park, set up defensively, try keep the score down. And look, Dublin defensively themselves have looked very weak at times this year. We've conceded a goal in every game, barring the game against Kildare and against Derry as well. Funny enough, both of those two games in Croke Park. And Kildare were probably actually a little bit unlucky not to get a goal in that game. So, that will give them a bit of hope. But in fairness to Kildare, we haven't seen much of Daniel Flynn. I don't think he started the last day. Jimmy Hoyland seems to be out with a possible injury as well. So, you're looking at Jack Robinson and Paddy Woodgate, who look good against Wicklow. But you would imagine Dublin will come through. And I'm going to say Dublin by 9 points. That might be me being a bit kind, to be honest with you, because I think this being in double figures would also be very, very likely. But yeah, I'm gonna go for Dublin to get the victory, and for Kildare, it might be a bit of an anxious sort of look around to the games in Ulster to see if they're gonna possibly end up in the Tailteann Cup alongside their near neighbours in Meath. In terms of bet of the weekend and player of the week, bet of the weekend is, I suppose, if you were gonna bet on anything, I'd probably bet on Down to beat Donegal. I think you'd get a good price for that. And I think it's, or Down to be Armagh, I should say, actually, sorry. I think there is a possibility that Down can do it. I would give them a strong chance, but I do think ultimately Armagh will beat Down. And in terms of player of the week, Could Rian O'Neill have a big game for Armagh, maybe coming back in? Although, does he start? I suppose that is a bit of an unknown. You're looking at Samuel Roy, like playing in Croke Park as well. Such a huge game for him and this Louth side. And obviously Derry versus Monaghan as well. And do you know what? I'm going to go for Shane McGuigan as player of the week. I think if Derry are to come through Monaghan, Shane McGuigan will need to be at it and he'll need to be in his best form. So, yeah, I'm going to go for player of the week, Shane McGuigan. Bet of the week, down to beat Armagh, although I do think Armagh will beat Down. But, you know, if I was going to throw money on anything this weekend, I'd probably throw money on Down to beat Armagh. But look, I'm certainly not a betting man, so maybe the best thing to do, keep your money in your pockets. But let me know your opinions in the comments down below. Anyway, lads, we'll go ahead and wrap this up here. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions in the comments down below. Let me know your predictions for some of these games as well. Let me know what you think will end up happening in some of this weekend's various championship football actions. So yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap this up here. Cheers to anyone who tuned in. Leave a like, subscribe. See you all soon.